I really appreciate you bring attention to rural migrant worker, and I agree that the damage of COVID-19 on them is especially harsh. But my question is about this rural-urban divide in terms of the consequences. And there is a urban, as you pointed out, there is a very strong support among the city residents behind the Chinese government right now. And whether this legitimacy, I want to circle back to the question of the support and legitimacy, whether rural people and their sufferings can influence the current narrative of Chinese government victory or competence in the strong leadership here. I'm actually concerned whether they have any voice here, because obviously urban people and people who are intellectuals and elites, they're actually controlling the narrative.
I think that when we've seen sort of a upswelling of urban concern or support for migrant worker concerns, has been related to to tragedies. So we saw it way back, I think in 2003, if I recall correctly, with the death of this migrant named Sun Zhigang in one of the what they called the black jails then, where they would pick up migrants and throw them in there if they didn't have proper documentation in the cities. At that point, there was it became a national issue, and people like Xu Zhiyong, now the rights lawyer, who's now I believe back in jail, started to focus on and people like Teng Biao, who's I believe in New York, started to focus on migrant worker concerns, and it actually became a national issue. A few years ago with the left behind children, the children of migrant workers who typically are left behind because they can't get into city schools and grow up apart from their parents, except for maybe seeing them once a year at the Lunar New Year. That also became a very big issue. Particularly, there were some deaths in Guizhou of migrant kids that had been left behind, that were, in one case, sleeping in a dumpster and asphyxiated because they started a fire there. That became a national issue. But I do think that generally, other than these moments when some tragedy happens, I'm afraid that the urban attitude towards the migrants, I don't think is very, very favorable. And you'll see, I mean, an example I mentioned in the book and just was really hit home for me was a number of years ago when the Chinese government decided they wanted to bring more migrant worker children into urban schools, basically do the right thing. What happened? There were protests by urban families, urban parents who did have the hukou to live in the cities, who had no desire to see more competition in the schools from migrant kids. So I guess I'm not too optimistic about this becoming an issue, a place where you see urban support for the migrants.